get to see. And it was a prophetic moment from Jeremy Hintzman when he said that if we had a good judge, or if they really knew what they're doing, some judge would order a new IRB hearing for people, and that actually happened about a month later.
I think the weirder part about that whole thing to me was the fact that there was actual, I don't remember who it was, but there was a liberal MP in the audience, or an advisor or something, and Dale had pretty much point blank asked him, well, you guys keep saying you're going to support us, Corey's about to be deported tomorrow, how much more notice do you need?
Yeah.
Pretty ballsy from a guy asking to stay.
That was towards the end.
Yeah,
so there's probably only about 10 or 15 minutes, I think, left of that.
That's a big deal. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? Any confusion? Really, this actually makes sense. We're here and it doesn't make sense to some of us sometimes. Something I kind of wanted to point out, they were talking about Chuck. He spent 19 and a half years, I swear to God, on the USS Enterprise. In the Navy and the Marine Corps, which are pretty much the same thing. At the 20-year mark, you get half your pension for the rest of your life. That's how much that man walked away from. He would not have had to work another day in his life. And that is the amount of dedication that man has. So I've always been in awe of him.
Yeah.
He's larger than life, he really is.
Chuck is a really, really interesting case because, as Dean said, that he was this close to retirement. And and if you can tell from his accent, he's from Kentucky, deep south, and I think he said 4 generations U.S. military, very, very Republican. He had been very right-wing, and for him to realize that the U.S. military had been lying and this war was based on lies when he had been very right-wing warmonger for all his life. His whole belief system was turned upside down. His life world was turned upside down. So, so when people try to, oh, well, you didn't really know what you're getting into, you're just a coward, we bring out the example of Chuck, who had a complete change and his whole value system was turned upside down, and then he came to Canada, and some people still remain a little weary of left-wing activity. They become anti-war, but that's as far as left-wing as they go. Not Chuck. He is interested in labor, he's involved in the labor movement, environmental movement. He's become quite the activist.
What's his other name? What's his other name? Chuck.
Chuck Wiley.
Wiley, I believe, yeah.
And he has not been given, he's still waiting for his PRA.
Yeah, his is taking a good long time for whatever reason.
I think they're afraid to touch him.
Yeah, I would be if I were them, I wouldn't want to touch him.
Because he's one that they cannot try to say, well, you know, you're being a coward. Not given his record. And he was pretty high ranking, he was chief petty officer on his ship.
Yeah, that film was about 2.5 years ago. Can you do a quick review of the status of some of those people now?
Yeah, Dean, still here. And I mentioned earlier that Dean had a review at the Federal Court of Canada on December 14th. They were going to review both his, well, it was to see if they would review his PRA and agency application. So that was December 14th. We're waiting word. So if the judge comes back and says, yes, he gets a new agency application, then we buy him some more time. If not, there could be, if it's negative, there could be a removal notice within weeks. But Dean has put down roots, are you partner married?
No, we're having some issues with the state of North Carolina about...
okay. Yeah. But he has settled down family, has a Canadian child, so has roots in the community, but is very vulnerable. If we get a negative decision from the federal court, you could get a deportation notice. So he's vulnerable. Corey Glass, who that very day got a removal notice, is still here. He's in Sault Ste. Marie. About a couple of weeks after this event, we won a stay of removal from the court. And then he had a judicial review and was ordered, I think, a new agency application, humanitarian compassionate. But he's since married a Canadian citizen. They now have 2 kids. So he's put down roots as well. Jeremy Hintzman, the longest running, is still here. Maybe one of the longest refugee claimants in Canada. He's now been here 7 years. We just won big at the Federal Court of Appeal in July. November. Yeah, the hearing was in July. The decision came down in November. Federal Court of Appeal, he gets a new review. So that was a huge, huge, huge decision because that was Federal Court of Appeal, which is one level higher than the federal court. So he's still here. Chuck, yes, still here. Azil Lamarche, the very young guy who looks like he's 12. He was 18, actually.
Didn't look it.
Didn't look it at all. He voluntarily went back. So he didn't get a deportation notice. He just decided to go back.
What happened to him when he went back?
He's...
I didn't hear about him until when he went back.
He's on Facebook. So
can't be doing that badly. He's got internet access.
He hasn't been arrested or anything that we know of. But he just decided to skip the red tape and just go back and try and pick up his life.
Actually, I think I have a partial answer to that. In the Marine Corps, like within the first year, if you have trouble with it, you're eligible to just be kicked out. Regardless, I mean, like setting aside like the legal stuff, they're just like, okay, failure to adapt, good luck. And I think that's what happened to him. He came up here like right after boot camp, I think.
Right, pretty soon.
It was real soon. It was well within the first year, so I think that's what
they may have just forgiven him.
They may have just said out.
Joshua Key, who wrote the book that they were talking about, the federal court ordered a new IRB hearing. They told him to go right back to the immigration board and get it, examine the UNHCR handbook that says that a soldier has the right to apply for refugee status if you don't have to commit war crimes. It can be something short of war crimes. And that wasn't taken into consideration, that he had participated in 200 raids that uncovered nothing, and that he saw atrocities, that he saw breaches of the Geneva Conventions, and that is grounds for refugee status in another country. So he was told to go back, give him a new hearing, which he had a year and a half ago, and that was negative. So he got, so his second case was, so his second time around was turned down. But he's also since married a Canadian citizen, and they're having a baby. So there's a lot of sponsorship applications, but they're also being stalled. Deserters, resistors are being flagged. That their applications they're being approved in principle, and then they don't go any further. So they're being basically not treated equally. So, but we haven't had a deportation in about a year and a half. We're just waiting on a bunch of decisions.
How many have been sent out?
2. Robin Long was the very first. That was 2.5 years ago, July 17th or something like that of 2008. Not long after Corey got his reprieve. Robin Long was deported from BC, sentenced to 15 months, served 12, I think. So he was deported. Cliff Cornell, also in BC. The only people we've lost were out in BC. Yeah.
Why do you think I'm here?
Well, we also have a really great lawyer, Alyssa Manning. The next one was Cliff Cornell, who was deported, and he served, I think he was sentenced to 12 and served 9. You can get out for good behavior. So those were the only 2 that we've actually had deported, and were given very lengthy prison sentences. And which is a point that is repeatedly brought up in all of the court cases, that resistors get heavier prison sentences if they speak out against the war than someone who just goes AWOL for a few months in the States, and they give them a couple of months. But if you speak out against the war in Canada, if you're politically opposed, they throw the book at them and give them very long sentences.
Kim's still here.
Oh, Kim Rivera, yes. Yeah, Kim's still here. She had a pretty scary time 2 years ago. She got a removal notice, and at the 11th hour, literally the 11th hour, she got a stay of removal, and then was granted a judicial review. So she's she was ordered a new agency application. Now, she was married when she came to Canada and had 2 kids, but they've since had another kid, so she's got a little Canadian, Katie Marie Rivera. She's so cute. So she has a Canadian baby.
Brandon Huey.
Brandon Huey is in Montreal, last I heard. Also awaiting on a spousal support sponsorship application. But he's still here. Some have gone back voluntarily. Aslan Lamarche, the one from Harlem, he actually went back, got a discharge, and came back to Canada. Yeah.
You mean Benjamin?
Sorry, Benjamin.
Benjamin Long?
Yeah. Who did I say?
Aslan?
Aslan, sorry, Benjamin. Yeah.
Okay. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. So he came back to Canada. He got his discharge. They put him in. They actually did put him in jail when he went back. So, but he managed to get a good lawyer, got a discharge, and was allowed back into Canada. So he chose the one who said that Andy Barry at some point asked him to put their hands up, like who would. If you're allowed to go back home tomorrow, how many of you would? And he was one who would. That he was homesick. He was from New York City, and he also experienced racism here, and he was one that wanted to go back. And then when he had the opportunity, he came back to Canada. So it's a nice ending. He's doing quite well, social worker.